So welcome back to the Floriani Software Fundamentals video series on FTCU. My name is Mark Garetz and I'm a National Floriani educator. In this section we're going to be going over a general overview of the interface and how to navigate around it. So as we talked about earlier, FTU starts up with this My Floriani Today screen, and from here you can either create a new design, open a design, open the most recently used design, or do any of the other functions that are here. Now typically when I'm working with the software, I usually click create a new design or open a design, and every now and then I want to continue working on a design that I've been working on, so I'll use this icon. But typically what you want to do is create a new design. Now if you simply close this window, you will just have a big gray area here on your screen. And you'll notice that I've got a lot of icons along the bottom, a lot of icons along the side and along the top, and almost all of them right now are all grayed out. That's because I don't have a design window in here to work with. So I have nothing loaded, I don't have a fresh new design area to work on, so I can't do very much. And the software tries to be very smart with these icons. If I can't use an icon at the moment, it's going to gray it out so that I can't click on it, and it's reminding me that I need to do something first before I can activate one of the icons. And you'll see up here in the left-hand corner that I've got a few icons that are lit up. One is create a new window or open an existing design, and these are the same as they were on the My Floriani Today page. This is the batch converter. We'll come back to that in a much later lesson. But typically what you want to do is click here to create a new design. So if you see this big blank window here, it's kind of like the wall in your house and somebody gave you crayons. You can't color on the wall, or at least you shouldn't without getting into trouble. So what you want to do is put a fresh piece of paper on the wall before you start coloring. And that's what the create a new design or new design page does. And you'll find that most of us educators call this a new piece of paper because this little icon does look like a piece of paper, and obviously it's not a piece of paper. And you'll notice that as I hover over an icon, two things happen. One is I get the little orange box around it to tell me that if I click on it now, I will activate it. And secondly, you'll see that little tip come up that tells me what it does. So each of the icons has that little, what we call a tooltip, that pops up for a few seconds to tell you what it does. So I'm going to go ahead and click create a new page, and you'll see that when I do that, I get a new page. And we also call this a design window or design page. And the interface has tabs. And you'll see right here I've got a tab called Design 1. And when you start up the software for the very first time each day, it's going to start out with Design 1. If I wanted to create another page, by clicking it again, I would get a second tab called Design 2. And I would keep adding Design 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever on here as I created new pages. And I can flip back and forth between these pages at any time by clicking on the tab. Now you can't see anything happening because right now there's nothing on either one of these pages. And if I were to open up a file, you would see instead of Design 1, you would see the name of the file. And we'll come to opening and saving files in a following lesson, but this is your design window or design interface. And you can see that it has a grid, and you can also see that now that I have this window open, that a whole lot more of my icons are lit up. So let's briefly go over some of these icons and what they do. In this area is your open, file, save, print, batch converter, etc. These are copy, paste, and cut, and they're not lit up because I don't have anything selected. These are your undo and redo buttons. These are all important buttons, and you'll find out that as you use the software, these are going to become your friends, and you can see that they're not lit up either because I haven't done anything yet. This is your properties box display, and the properties box is over here. So this turns it on and off. So if I click it, my properties box goes away. If I click it, my properties box comes back. These are your settings. We'll come back to that in a second. This is your zoom window here. So this is kind of your magnification. It starts out at 100%. If you click the down arrow by it, you can see you can zoom in, zoom out, zoom to fit, which fits everything on the screen, zoom to whatever you've got selected, zoom to 1:1, which is an approximation of the exact size, and then you've got various zoom percentages for zooming in and out, and we'll see how that works in a bit. This button right here, this one goes to the Floriani Club, so if I were to click it, if I unclick that, if I hover over this, you'll see it says the Floriani Club. This would go to the Floriani Club, and this one is our slow redraw or stitch simulator. We'll show you that in a bit. This is a really nice feature of the software that you're going to use a lot called Save to Sew. We will come back to that in a future lesson. These icons all right in here, these are your stitch and vector or line creation tool. So this is where you would create something from scratch right in here. These are some extra stitch creation and stitch functions: fit to hoop, distortion, symbols, buttonholes, your magic wand and your magic needle. And we're going to cover all of these icons in depth. In my second row down here in this section, I've got my text entry. These are built-in shapes and pieces of artwork that you can work with. These are your wizards. So I've got my various wizards here, and we'll get into that. This is my split wizard. So this allows me to split designs over multiple hoopings, and we'll get into that. These are some fun controls here. We've got our fling repeat, design repeat, corners repeat. We have a feature called color play, you design it, and word play. And then in here we've got some design features like optimize our sequence, optimize our entry exit points, color sort the design, add basting stitches, duplicate parts of the design, and we're going to cover all of these. Built-in templates, our circle template, create outlines around things. In here we've got our flip and rotate controls. These are our alignment controls, our distribution controls, some of the many artwork controls. The most often used ones are right here. These are your all-important group and ungroup controls right here. And finally, combine and break apart. Going down the left-hand side, we've got our normal selection tool. And this is the mode that you are in most of the time, your normal selection tool. We'll talk about selecting objects in a bit. But this control right here is your lasso, another way to select things. Your shape for editing shapes, your stitch tool for editing stitches. This is your magnification tool, your zoom tool. We'll talk about that. A ruler for measuring things. Your 3D view on and off. So this gives you a realistic thread view or not. This one allows you to import vector artwork, turn on backdrops, etc. So a lot of your common viewing controls and selecting controls are down along the left side here. In this area here we have our thread palette controls. So this allows us to bring up various thread palettes as well as assign thread colors to elements of the design. And this top one is our design palette. There's nothing in it because I have no design loaded. Down here is the available colors for the various thread palettes that we have. And we're going to go over all of these controls in detail. And lastly, down along the bottom here, we have our stitch styles control. And these allow us to take a stitch object or an outline or vector object and assign stitches to it or change the stitches that are assigned to it. So for example, here's a solid fill and here's a fancy fill, and I could switch back and forth between what kinds of fills are in there simply by clicking one of these stitch style icons to apply it. And then the last thing I want to show you is over here in your properties. We've got our properties box up here, which shows us various things about the design. And this box changes a lot depending on what we have selected. So we have nothing here right now. So it's allowing us to put in some notes about the design And lastly, down here is our sequence view, which allows us to change the way things stitch out and also to see the way things stitch out. And then we have our browser, library, and design tabs finally over here on the very, very far right. And we're going to be going over all of these in detail. But what I want to talk about first is the general display. So we went over what the tabs do. Now, if you want to close a tab, like for example, I want to close Design 2, I can simply click the little icon by it. And since I don't have anything here, I click this X, it is going to close that design tab and it's gone. If I had something there and I had made some changes to it, a little warning would pop up saying, hey, are you sure you want to close this before you've made any changes? But that didn't happen because obviously I didn't have anything there. But what we want to talk about now is the grid that we see here and the controls for the grid and the view. And also these ruler bars that are along the top and the side. And if you'll notice right now I'm in inches, and you can kind of tell that because I'm in 1, 2, 3, 4, and I've got my inch marks here, and the big clue is right over here at the upper right. It says inches. Now if I prefer to work in metric, all I have to do is come up to my ruler and right click on it, and I can switch from this little pop-up that comes from inches into metric. So if I do that, now I'm in metric mode. If I want to go back to inches, I simply right click again and select inches, and now I'm back in inches mode. And I'm going to come up to my ruler again and right click, because here is where I can turn the display of the grid on and off. If I click that selection for show grid, it's going to turn my grid off. If I right click on the ruler one more time and click show grid, it's going to toggle the grid back. Now I have another way of doing that, and that's over here on my left hand toolbar, and it's this grid icon, and this allows me to show or hide the grid. So by clicking here, it turns the grid off. If I click it again, it turns the grid back on. So we call this a toggle because things go on and off. And if I click it again, you'll see that it's not lit up orange because the grid is off. If I click it again, you'll see a little orange highlight around it because the grid is on. And you'll see that I'm in what we call normal select mode because I have my cursor looking like that little white arrow, and right here at the top, my normal select icon is also outlined in orange. So whatever mode or icon you are in, you're going to see a little orange outline around it to tell you that's the mode that you're in. So let's go back to our grid settings. If I come back up here to my ruler and I right click one more time, you'll see that I have a function called snap to grid. And what snap to grid does is it allows me, when I enter points or shapes or something as I'm drawing or clicking around here, it's going to snap to the intersection of my grid lines, and we'll cover how to change where these intersections fall in just a second. I also have something called snap to guidelines. We'll come back to that. And we also have something called snap to anchors. And we haven't talked about what anchors are yet, except for in our talk about vectors. Remember, we talked about the points. Those are also called anchors. So if we want to snap to those points that are in a design, we would check snap to anchors. But what we're going to come down here first is go to our grid settings. So if I click that, you will get an option window that shows me my grid settings. And you can see right now I have both the horizontal and vertical grid spacing set to 1/4 of an inch, so 0.25 inches. And you can see here that these light gray dotted lines, those are my normal grid lines, and you can see that they are on 1/4 inch spacing. So I've got 1/4 inch squares here to line things up to and give me a reference point. And I can control the color of that grid with this box right here. So if I click the down arrow, if I wanted to, I could change the color. You probably don't want to do that. I think it probably looks the best at light gray like this, so it's not too distracting. and you may feel different, so you can change it. Over here you can change the style of the grid. So we have three choices. You can show it as solid lines, as dashed lines, and you can see that's what's selected right now. And I can also show it as dots. And I think that most people would agree that the default of dashed lines probably works the best, but if you want to, you can change it. Over here we have something called our grid major settings, and this is a highlighted line, and again you can change the color of it with this box here, and the default is purple. And this highlighted line shows you a marker every so many of these lines over here. So right now the default is set to 10, so for every 10 ones of these it's going to make a dark purple line. And you can see here in my grid that I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then another purple line, and again on and on. And again, you can change this to be anything that you want that makes sense for what you are doing at the time. And then lastly, in this grid options, here's another place that you can turn on snap to grid, snap to guidelines, and snap to anchors. And as you're going to discover in FTCU and in most Floriani software, there's usually more than one way, sometimes 4 or 5 ways to get to the same place. So this is one way to turn on snap to grid or snap to guidelines or snap to anchors. And if I click cancel here, and remember when I right clicked on the ruler bar, you saw that there was another way to do that, just like turning the grid on and off here or turning the grid on and off here, yet another way to do that. Now let's talk about guidelines for a second. And to do that, I'm going to actually turn off my grid. So I'm going to come over here to my left toolbar and click my grid icon to turn it off. And what guidelines are is they are horizontal and vertical lines that I can put arbitrarily anywhere on this window. So to create a guideline, I come up to my ruler and I click and I drag without letting off the mouse down into the area to create a guideline that's horizontal. And I can put it right here on the 2-inch mark, for example. If I want to create a vertical guideline, I would do it from the left-hand ruler, click and drag, and I could set it, say, at 0 right here. And that's pretty close. Okay, so if I wanted to align something to 2 and 0, sometimes using these guidelines is a good way to go. So also if I wanted to line something up in an embroidery design and it didn't particularly line up with the grid setting that I have, or I don't like working with grids, using these guidelines is a great tool. Now if I want to move a guideline around, if I positioned it in the wrong place, I can simply hover over it until my cursor gets that little double-headed arrow to tell me that if I click right now, I will select that guideline. So if I click and drag that guideline, I can move where it is. And I'm not limited to these 2 guidelines. If I wanted to put a second horizontal guideline on, or third or fourth one, I could click and drag as many guidelines as I need to into the area, and then I could also move them around. Now to get rid of a single guideline, what you do is you hover over it till you see the double-headed arrow, and you click and you drag it off the screen, and that'll get rid of it. If I want to get rid of all the guidelines, what I do is I come up to my ruler bar, right-click, and there's a selection here called Remove Guidelines. So if I click that, the guidelines are going to all go away. And if I right-click on the ruler one more time, you'll now see that Remove Guidelines is grayed out because there are no guidelines to remove anymore. So that's a general interface overview. Again, there's not much you can do until you create a new design window.